Your brain only really does what it's programmed to do. It can't really do anything other than what you've told it to do because you are the programmer. However, most of our brains were programmed by scared, frightened little children that didn't really know much better. So when you get into adulthood, a lot of the things that you programmed into your mind as a kid that made sense at the time stop making sense. And as a little kid, there's a ton of reasons why you wouldn't want to know what you want. And even as an adult, there's a ton of reasons why you may not want to know what you want. If you know what you want, well, then you may actually have to go and get it. And if you actually have to go and get it, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. You could end up failing. You could go down a path that maybe your friends or your family or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever doesn't approve of. And as you start to develop your own sense of self and really get settled into your own desires and who you are, you could find out that all the people in your life don't actually like you anymore, which is a very, very possible thing to have happen. Because if you have been living your life a certain way, and if you've been hiding your desires and all these sorts of things, quite honestly, the people in your life don't actually really know who you are. To a large degree, you don't even know who you are. So as you start developing these new parts of yourself and getting clear on what your desires are, it could be in stark contrast to who you know yourself to be. It could also be in contrast to who your friends and your family and your coworkers and whoever else could know you to be. So it could actually be kind of a jarring transition into knowing who you are and what you want and how you want to live your life. What up, everybody? Welcome back to Operation Moksha. As always, I'm your host, Chris Orozco, and today we're going to be talking about something really cool because this is something that happens way more common than you might think, but it also goes unidentified way more common than you might think. And it is the fear of knowing what you want. I've been coaching people for the last 8 years, and whenever I teach a course, whenever I get a new client, whenever I teach a class or anything about shadow integration, I always start with making a vision for your life. You've probably heard me say that on this channel a bunch of times. And the reason for that is because you need to know where you're going so that you can know what blocks need to get looked at. Because otherwise you can just look at your shadow and integrate shit for the rest of your life and not necessarily make any huge practical differences in your life. However, if you have a vision for your life and you know where you want to go and you walk towards it, and then you start integrating your obstacles, then suddenly you're facing the stuff that is in the way of who you want to become so that you can just keep walking in that direction and not just get lost navel gazing for fucking ever like a lot of people do. One of the most common things that I run into when it's time to either create the vision in a group course or one-on-one is a lot of times people have a really hard time figuring out exactly what they want. And not a lot of people think of this as a fear. This is the interesting part about it. People think they're broken, they think there's something wrong with them, they think they're cowards, I don't know, they think all kinds of really interesting stuff. But when we really dig into it and I simply ask them like what happens internally and we do a little bit of digging, what we find out is that they're actually afraid of owning what they want. There's some examples that don't fit into this, but for the most part, your mind really only does what it's programmed to do. For most people, this is the case. And so if you try and think of what you want, and either you get brain fog, or you shut down, or you get anxious, or you want to take a nap, or whatever happens, you have to trust that at some point, you told your brain that that was the best thing to do. You told yourself that's like, hey, if I know what I want, some scary bad thing might happen, so it's better to just fog over or get depressed or whatever it is you need to do in order to avoid knowing what you want. Now that may seem a little bit ridiculous, but there's actually some really good reasons to be afraid of knowing what you want. Now, the three most common ones that I'm going to talk about today are failure, rejection, and responsibility, because those are the ones that seem to come up the most, right? Because if you know what you want, you may have to go for it. And if you go for it, then you may fail. And if you fail, most people think of failure as this like one-time thing where you fail and then your life is just kind of over after that. Like, try this as an experiment. Like, imagine failure. Most of the time, whenever I talk to people, there's usually this just like blank blackness behind failure, as if life doesn't go on after that. But it fucking does. If you're one of the people that is afraid of failure, then what your mind is really asking you to do is to prepare for the inevitability of failure. Because if you try something new, if you go down a different life path or anything like that, you are going to fail a bunch of times. I was in business for 6 years before I was profitable. It was just failure after failure after failure after failure until I finally got it right. And it was difficult for sure, but I knew that that's how it was gonna be. I knew failure was a part of it, so I could welcome it. I could welcome all the uncomfortable emotions associated with it. I could integrate them. Each time I got better, each time I got stronger, and ultimately I finally started winning. Now, if you are in the second category where you're afraid of rejection, this one also makes a hell of a lot of sense. Because when you get clear on who you really are and who you really want to be and what kind of life you want to have, that may be at odds with how everyone else around you knows you. your friends, your family members, your romantic partners, your whoever else could be emotionally attached to you being a certain way. And if who you've been up until this point is the kind of person that hides their desires, as you start to get clear on them, that could be kind of a jarring experience for you. They're gonna be out of alignment with your identity. So when you come and start to realize who you actually are and what you really want, you could be like, whoa, what the fuck? I didn't know that was in there. I didn't know that's what I wanted to be. I always saw myself as this sort of thing. And so that in and of itself can trigger an identity crisis, and it's really fucking uncomfortable, so I recommend taking your time with that. But also, the people in your life may have become emotionally dependent on the version of you that didn't know what you wanted. Maybe you're a people pleaser. Maybe you're always being there for other people at the expense of knowing what you want and doing what you want. There are people that could have potentially become emotionally dependent on that. So as you start to get clear on who you are and what you want, it might be a jarring experience for them as well. Maybe some will acclimate, maybe some will get mad, maybe some will leave. Like, these are things that just fucking happen. So you have to figure out what specifically you are afraid of. Because for me, rejection and abandonment are scary for different reasons than they will be for you. So you have to get really specific about what it is that you're afraid of and why, and then come up with a plan for dealing with that. And if you do deal with that, then all of a sudden knowing what you want won't be so scary because you have a plan to deal with the big, bad, scary thing that you're terrified of. Now, the last part that I want to talk about is responsibility. And this one is a little bit different because this is kind of more along practical lines, right? Like if you see like a career path, right? Or some new thing that you want to become, and it requires a lot of responsibility. But you are not or have not been the kind of person that could handle that level of responsibility before. You actually have to become someone new. That can be a daunting experience. And if you don't have an integrative framework to know how to do that, that could be really fucking scary. Because if you do have an integrative framework, then what you know that it's just a matter of integrating a new identity that is in alignment with the next level of responsibility and all the stuff that it's gonna require of you. But if you don't have an integrative mentality, then you're just gonna see a whole bunch of shit that you don't think you're capable of doing. And it makes sense to want to avoid that, because who would want to go down a life path that they genuinely don't think they're even capable of? Nobody would. I wouldn't even recommend that. If you don't think you're genuinely capable of something, maybe don't do it. Like, maybe build the skills to become capable. Maybe develop the identity of somebody who is capable. And then once you start feeling a little bit more secure in your ability to do stuff, then go take it on. Because I've personally run that whole thing into the ground and I burned out. I started my coaching business thinking I was ready, but ultimately parts underneath of me were terrified of the responsibility and everything that it would require of me to fully engage. So I actually burned out 3 years in, and then had to take 1.5 years off to work for somebody else, develop the new identity, develop the new skills, so that when I got back into coaching, I actually felt prepared to do it. So these are the 3 main things that come up when people are afraid of knowing what they want. It's usually either fear of failure, fear of rejection, or fear of some kind of responsibility and not thinking that you're actually up to the task. I have spelled out for you what you can begin to do if you fall into any one of these other 3 categories. However, if you find yourself in a different category, let me know and I can make a video out of it. Or if you have any more questions on the 3 different ways that this can show up and want a little bit more help with that, let me know, because I can make more videos on all this shit. But I really hope this was helpful. I'm Chris Orozco. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Whenever you're done. It's just crinkling sounds. John folding his origami dollar for no fucking reason.
I made this for you.
It's a square.